Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is a 1963 Dodge Max Wedge car. Parked in a hangar next to a bunch of other amazing things, like, for example, this Daytona, which you may recognize. Don't worry about anything else happening over there. This is a very cool, very unique, and indeed very special car. It's part of a pretty cool collection here that belongs to a customer of Rocky Restorations, and I'm lucky enough to be working on it today. Now, I am far from an expert on these cars. In fact, this is the only one I've ever seen in my entire life, let alone touched. But I have read a good bit about these over the years, so I know a few things. This car exists to win drag races. That's pretty much it. And for that reason, it's a stripper 330 model. It's a two-door with a post in the middle. That would be called a two-door sedan. You could call it a post car if you like, but then people might get mad at you. There are a good few things missing that you might see on an ordinary road car. Obviously, it's got manual steering and manual brakes. It doesn't have structural reinforcement on the underside of the hood. Also missing from under the hood, the battery, because it's been moved to the trunk. Interestingly enough, this car does have a radio. I'm kind of surprised by that. If you're in the know on old school drag cars and that sort of thing, you may be familiar with the term radio delete. It turns out at Chrysler, there was no radio delete. When you ordered the car, you had to specify a radio. You would generally have several options, and one of those options was no radio at all. So it's not that the radio was deleted, it's just that one wasn't ordered. On those cars, of course, there is no antenna hole, which is cool. Then, of course, you'll have a matching blanking plate on the dash. Being a 1963 Dodge, this is a slightly facelifted version of the 1962 B-body. Exner's blunder, the sales disaster that started sinking Chrysler in the early 1960s. The B-body's got a facelift for 63, and then again in 64, and then again in 65 until they were finally replaced with the 66 model penned by Elwood Engel, the straight line, beautiful coronet on the Dodge side. Although they're kind of awkward, I do like the 63 B-bodies. I prefer the Plymouth. It has that big crazy oval line right here for the turn signal and parking light. I don't know, they're funky, but they're really neat. None of that is as important as what's under the hood though. This is the Max Wedge 426, and this one in particular is kind of special. You see, you had your standard cruising model Max Wedge engine, and then you had the high compression 13.5:1 Max Wedge engine. That's what we're looking at here. One small note, that battery relocation is only found on 13.5:1 cars. Again, because this was designed to be a race car. You weren't going to drive this to church on Sundays. Probably. There are some interesting features on the early big block. If you've been playing with muscle cars your whole life, you might not actually know that the early valve covers are missing those corner bolts. It's a 4-bolt cover. Obviously, we've got the special gigantic cross ram manifold. This is slightly different than the old school cross rams, which hung way over here by the inner fenders. They're mounted above the engine, but kind of splayed apart and at a funny angle. Notice the plugs in the middle. That is to access the intake bolts because, of course, you can't get to them this way. Mounted on top of that manifold are a pair of Carter AFBs. They usually have dual pan-looking air cleaners. Of course, I have those off right now to service this thing, but it's a really formidable look. It's not quite 426 Hemi formidable, but it's up there. Because this is 1963, the Hemi's not on the scene yet. It wouldn't arrive until 1964. Drag racing was not the aim of the 426 Hemi. It was designed to win at NASCAR. So these two engines did coexist for a time. You may have already noticed the gigantic special exhaust manifolds. These two are Max Wedge specific. They're huge. They're tubular header-like, but it is still a cast iron manifold. The Max Wedge also has a very special cylinder head with a humongous and generous intake port. These heads do not have a heat crossover whatsoever. They have gigantic valves. Hey, all you gotta have a fan shroud guys. This is the pinnacle of performance at Chrysler in 1963, and it doesn't have one. And it has a 4-blade fan, borrowed off of a Slant 6. Admire this crazy throttle contraption. If this was an automatic, there would be a kickdown right here. I find the heater hose concoction on this car particularly interesting. Look at that routing. As with all performance Chryslers of this time, this car does have a cast iron dual point distributor which came from Prestolite. It does not have a vacuum advance. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice this thing now has a Pertronic system. I just installed that because although I found spark, the last person that tried to start it did not. Hopefully it will fire more readily now. We'll learn that in a minute. Obviously this car is pristine and has been very well cared for its entire life, so we don't see the typical firewall rust found on these early B-bodies. That's all very nice looking. You can see the manual choke cable snaking in here. I should probably put that in another clip up here. Much better. Notice, of course, this car has the single pot pump and pray master cylinder, as was typical of this time, but it also has a special heat shield to protect it from that manifold, which is indeed very close. Notice, although this engine is known as the Max Wedge, it actually says Ram Charger 426 right on it. I'm sure that's a nod to Chrysler's in-house racing team from around this time, the Ram Chargers. If you're not up on earlier big block history, you may not even know that the 426 Wedge existed. Of course, the 426 Hemi would come along in '64 at that same cubic inch size. It uses all of the same bottom end geometry, although the components themselves are slightly different. This same raised deck engine architecture would expand to 440 cubic inches starting in 1966. At this time, 426 was the biggest. I do like all the airplane noises, that's enjoyable. Anyway, obviously this car has been restored. There are a bunch of nicely done components. Look at the fancy plating on that, the silver on the spring there, the replacement restoration style sticker for the antifreeze. Lots of cool stuff. I do notice there's no blackout behind the grille, and I'm pretty sure this turquoise color should have that. But in general, it's very tidy. Very, very nice. I'm sure you noticed the shifter in a previous shot. This is a 3-speed manual. Why a 3-speed and not a 4? That would be because Chrysler had not come up with their A833 yet in 1963. That would arrive in '64. Note the manual choke pole handle right here, and note also it doesn't really look like it belongs there. Notice the gold in that upholstery on the seat. There are a couple style armrests used in this time. This is the cheaper one. That makes sense given what car this is. This fancy car show board gives a lot more of the particulars on this car than I ever could. It's one of only 26 high compression cars accounted for. Apparently there were 162 built total. One of only 11 factory stick cars. The only one known in this color. 2-time Mopar Nationals winner. Admire the correct wheel and tire treatment. Very nice. For racing use, it would have had something else on the back there. Now this, of course, is a complete stock steel-bodied car. The ultimate culmination of the lineage of these racers at Chrysler had lightweight fenders and even an altered wheelbase. This isn't quite that. Tom informs me that these cars have a factory 450 gear ratio. So not exactly a nice, relaxing street driver. I mentioned the battery is in the trunk. Here it is. Currently charging because it was pretty much dead when we got here. Tom's off collecting parts, and one of those parts will probably be a fresh battery. Next to the battery, we find something else special. You may already know, but these are exhaust cutout plates. That's right, factory race car. You could uncork the exhaust and gain some extra horse ponies. Then you could pop these plates back on for pulling into your suburban neighborhood and that sort of thing. The exhaust system on these cars is just incredible. The pipes go toward the middle of the car to go through the crossmember cutouts. Then they kick outward and give us access to the plates before making a 90-degree connection, going back toward the middle of the car, snaking rearward, and then coming out again to reach the mufflers. They don't have fancy exhaust tips or anything, just a simple, unapologetic turn down. Here's a quick look at the Paul and Trunnion drive shaft setup. Because 1963, this car still has that. And here's a look at the transmission. I actually don't know what designation this is. I know I already mentioned I'm not exactly an expert on these cars, but I'm sure someone in the comments will be annoyed at me for not knowing the transmission code. What do you not see here in the wheel wells? Undercoating. Why would you need that to go racing? Ooh, first year Pentastar badge. I am very curious what this car weighs. I was able to find specs on the factory lightweight Superstock car. That weighed in at right around 3,300 pounds. I have to guess this one's probably in the 3,600 range. But I could be wrong on that. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd really like to hear this thing make engine noises. Obviously, I need to check my work on the Pertronics install. Hopefully, I've charged the battery enough at this point that it will fire. I got it to kick off with the dual point still in there for like 3 seconds. Big money? All right, that's certainly better. Kind of sounds like late timing. Yeah, subtle, real subtle. Wow, it just idles. Well, it did anyway. I do like that it pretty much hits on the first bump of the key with the Pertronics. It just doesn't want to stay running. There's no preheat to those carburetors. This thing's going to be cold-blooded. Okay, sometime today.
Carburetors and died, so we're gonna have to check the timing on this one. Oh yeah, smells like race gas.
Yeah, she's a little grumpy. As I'm getting in here to loosen the distributor hold down for adjustment, I'm reminded that the Max Wedge actually has a special hold down because it has to have a flat spot to dodge the manifold. Isn't that neat? If you ever see that version of the hold down at a swap meet, you're looking at a special piece. This hold down was reefed tight, which it really never needs to be. I usually put them to just beyond snug. At that point, you can normally twist the distributor a little bit if you have to make a change. It shouldn't need a ton more advance, but I did give it a healthy little bump. We'll see where that gets us. Of course, because this is a reverse rotation distributor, advances this direction with the body. Now that it's got a little bit of heat in it, it should fire right off. Nope, that's actually too much. You can hear how it struggles as soon as it hits on one cylinder. That is an instant tell that you've got too much timing advance dialed in. So I'll back it back off just a hair. I can't help but notice that this odometer reads 80,860 miles. Someone drove this car 80,000 miles. That is amazing. Obviously, there's no guaranteeing that hasn't been changed, but I would have expected it to be lower in a factory drag car. How about now? That's better. If the radio works. Might be hard to hear it though. All right, we're definitely close. It's a damn good thing we're at an airport and not in like a neighborhood, because that is not subtle. Now timing this car with a light becomes a bit of a problem because of course there's no battery here to connect to for power. Might have to get creative and wedge a hook on the back of the alternator or something. I ended up making my power connection up here at the relay and just grounding it to the throttle bracket, which worked well. I timed it at 10 degrees. You know, I did some research online and that seems to be about where they're supposed to be. 10 base, 31 total. Some adjustment from there may be required. I'd love to go out and drive this thing. Unfortunately, someone parked an airplane in the way, so we're not going to be able to do that today. Yeah, it's a little disappointing. Ultimately, this is not a race car anymore. It's a show car. It doesn't get driven on the street really either. Occasionally, yes. For the most part, it's going to fire up and go in a trailer and go to car shows and things. So I think where we've got it set now is probably close enough. Oh, what I would give to make a couple 1/8 mile passes in this thing. You don't need both kidneys, right? I'm pretty sure one of them's extra. Someday I do want one of these early B-bodies, I think. And the 63s are just about my favorites. I would prefer mine be the 63 hardtop flavor. 63 hardtops still have this roofline, which I really like. 64 got the bubble window, and I'm not as much of a fan on that. We weren't exactly sure what was wrong with this car. I mean, we kind of thought it was ignition related, but we brought carburetor kits along. Thankfully, I didn't need those, but I did use the air horn air cleaner gaskets. Those were missing. And there it is in all its fully dressed glory with dual unsilenced air filters. Believe it or not, it kind of smells like exhaust in here. Also race gas.
Asking for a friend, is that bad?
Yes, definitely bad. As mentioned, I'm certainly not an expert on these cars. Thankfully, I'm traveling with one today. If you watch my videos often, it's highly likely you know Tom Hergert with Rocket Restorations. Of course, he has his own channel where he often goes in depth with factory documentation, cool history, and things of that nature. So we're gonna let Tom show us the data book for this car and get a little more in depth on the details.
Hey everybody, this is Tom from Rocket Restorations, and I'm doing a little guest hosting on Jamie's channel here. So he did the video on the technical side of this, fixing this thing, getting it running. It's a customer Rockets up here. We're doing a house call today, fixing a few things on it. But I just wanted to show you, I know you guys love it when I go through these data books. Yep, this is the second year of the Fratzog, but they were very proud of it. These were by Ross Roy. They were the PR agency for Chrysler at the time, I guess, but they're the ones that put these books together, and there's a lot of really good information here. I just love seeing this stuff. These are the optional rear ends. rims. You can get 391s and a, you know, an A body that year. Nobody ever ordered them, but you could. This is all the cool stuff. Here's the styling and models. The Dart, the standard size Dodge, and the 880, the full size one. Series lineup, marketing position, 63 versus 62. There's so much good information in these. These are really fun to go through. There's the Dart, obviously. The wagon, the Polara 500. This was the luxury model with the console and buckets and all that fun stuff. This is, of course, the racy model. So it is the 330 with a post, the cheap one. So we're gonna go past the Polara 500, and the 440 was the midline, the 119-inch wheelbase, and the 330 was the cheapo. And if you're gonna build a high compression max wedge car, I mean, you're gonna build it out with 330. You know, all the dimensions, the engines that were available, a lot of good information in these. All right, let's go to the fun stuff. The 426-inch V8 engine. 426 V8 Ram Charger engine. That was the brand name for the Dodge version of the Max Wedge motor. Is equipped with forged aluminum pistons and a new one-piece short ram manifold designed to give maximum power output at high engine speeds. 2 4-barrel carburetors with high-capacity, non-silenced air cleaners are fitted to the intake manifold. New cylinder heads have larger ports. Long-duration camshaft designed to run at speeds in excess of 6,000 RPM. Mechanical valve gear includes dual high-load springs, extra heavy capacity valve retainers. Exhaust system features high-capacity, streamlined headers, and large diameter exhaust pipes. I love these Max Wedge motors. It's just such, it's so Chrysler. Chevy came out with the 409 and they had some cool stuff. They had dual quads, but like, I mean, these headers, like how cool are those? And they flow super, super well. This has exhaust cutouts on it. So you can just remove a plate and get open exhaust basically. The cross ram intake manifold, the unsilenced air cleaners, the carburetors, like there's just so much cool stuff on these. And this is the second year. So 62 was the first year and they were all 413 models with, you know, the same dual quad intake and exhaust manifolds, but the 413s had some issues. You know, the valves on these were so big they had to notch the top of the cylinder walls on those 62 413s because the valves were hitting the blocks. They actually had to relief them, and then even on the 426 they did it a hair, but the 413s they had to do a bunch on those. So there was the 62, there was a 63, and then 64 there's a bunch of differences as well. So these are still AFB carburetors, and 64 they actually came out with what ended up being the AVS carburetor. Low tonnage trucks. That's funny how they put that. You know, here's the unibody stuff. Unibody built like a bridge, braced by box section design. Unibody means extra protection. So if you get hit in a full frame car, it will collapse and kill you, whereas a Chrysler will save you. Color and upholstery. Here's the two-tone color combos. I was still big in 63, you know, 64, 65. They're kind of getting away from that by 66, but yeah, that's the original color. And I love these books. These are actual color samples of the car, but AA1 turquoise. Look at all that metallic in there. It's super cool. Here's the fender tag right there. The AA is the paint code right there. I don't have these fender tag memorized, so I can't like do off the top of my head decode like I would on most other cars. I can grab my book and get it, but yeah. Max Wedge fender tag. These are really neat too because these are actual trim samples. Like this is actual upholstery from the factory that they used on here. So there's the Polara 500, the Polara, and then the 440. The wagon had different interior trim. And then there's the 330. So they actually had cloth and vinyl. AA1 used that interior, as you can see right here. Cloth and vinyl interior. This also has the very rare 3-speed stick. It's really funny. This is one thing that people don't realize. On the 1963 Max Wedge cars, there might be another exception. If you guys know about it, you should comment on it. But I believe this is the only example of a car where the stick version is worth less than the auto version. That is not a great transmission. They were kind of hard to shift. They weren't that fast. And basically the automatic was just faster. Yeah, the transmission was called the T85, but again, they didn't work that well. You can actually get a 4-speed in a 63. They're super rare. They were a T10, but Chrysler knew that it would never hold up behind a Max Wedge, so that's why they had to use the 3-speed with the stick.
My thanks to Tom for helping with this video. If you're not already subscribed to the Rocket Restorations YouTube channel, you should check it out. He does all kinds of cool videos, technical stuff, he looks at auction cars, and he documents his adventures across the country collecting parts and cool projects. We are going to install a new battery. The one in the trunk's 10 years old, and Well, I charged it for like half an hour and it does start the car now, but I'm sure it won't for long. I'm pulling this ancient battery out now and I noticed this setup. Note there are 6 individual hoses here. They're routed through a grommet that goes through the floor. That would have been for a vented battery. You wouldn't want acid here. You would want it to leave harmlessly through the floor of the car. In a modern car that has a trunk battery, they also have one singular vent hose that runs outside for that exact reason. That is quite the hold down contraption. This trunk battery setup in general is quite interesting. Admire the dual grounds right there connected to the floor and the dual power feeds going out that way. There's a bracket that the feeds go through. There's the hole for those vents, of course. There are the 2 hold down brackets and then the dual grommets for the trunk pad. New battery installed. It's a little shorter than the correct battery, so it grabs on this side, but not so much on that side. Again, thankfully, this thing will not be making any drag strip runs. I gotta test all my hard work, right? One more fire up. Yeah. That's what it's supposed to do. All right then. It definitely started better with like 20 degrees. I could just kind of tell that's what this thing wants base. Obviously, we're stuck with the factory distributor and the factory timing curve, so it is what it is. Here's a fun game. Hot rod or airplane? Airplane. Well, there you go. An amazing piece of factory race car technology from 1963. Resplendent in fantastic turquoise. With any luck, next time we see it, we'll get to take it for a drive. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed looking at this thing. I certainly did. In any case, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, wherever you go, there's Mopar. Sometimes that works. Hey, I think this one's bad too. I could be wrong. Yay, we did it! Oh my God. It's magnificent. Yes? Airplane people. They're just like us.